Hi, this is Andrew with Mock Till You Drop, and in this video we're going to discuss how you can study more efficiently for the CFA Level I exam. So on this slide under the title it states, having a study plan alone isn't enough. There's a difference between having a study plan and having an efficient study plan. This is one example. We're going to go over some more examples in this video, not just how to create a more efficient study plan, but also how you can be more efficient in other areas you're studying. And before we begin, please be sure to click on that subscribe button below so you can stay up to date with our latest videos. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is how to create an efficient study plan. We'll talk about what it means to have an efficient study plan and how you can optimize your study plan to get the most out of it. And also having an efficient study plan is going to really lay the foundation for the rest of the topics we're going to cover here. Focus on results, not time in the books. You've probably heard the old saying you need to study for about 300 hours for this exam. Well, that's true, you'd be putting in a lot of time. However, the number of hours you spend isn't a really good measurement of an efficient study strategy. Rather, you should be more focused on results. And we'll talk about what this means in more detail. Majority of candidates will most likely have full-time jobs during the day, and that's going to eat up a lot of your study time. So what we want to look for are gaps during a workday, such as during your lunch or break. We'll talk about how you might be able to find studying, do some studying during your commute, most likely if you're using public transit. Of course, if you're driving yourself, you're probably going to be limited to audio only. CFA curriculum isn't exactly the most exciting material to go through, and even if you're using prep providers materials, there's only so much they can do to make the material more exciting. Therefore, your mind may wander from time to time, or you get distracted with something else you could be doing. So we'll discuss how you can minimize those distractions. And lastly, we'll talk about how you can properly practice. So what does this mean? Practice problems are a big part of your studying for the exam. And some common questions candidates might ask are, how many practice problems should I be doing? Or what should I be scoring on the mock exams? So we're going to tell you what we think are better methods for doing these. Okay, so what does it mean to have an efficient study plan? One way to think about this is, let's say you want to study for 5 months, get through all the readings, and then you do mock exams for the last 4 weeks. And you want to score at least 80% on the mock exams. Although this might sound like a good study strategy, with specific lengths of time for studying and being able to measure results with the mock exams, it can be improved upon. We'll go over in a little bit why trying to reach a certain score on the mock exams may not be the most efficient way to measure your success in that area. For now, let's look at the example of studying for 5 months. Even if you finish all the readings in this time frame, how do you really know if your time spent was efficient or not? One thing to look at is what areas of my weekend that I need to focus more attention on. This can be determined by doing the end of the chapter practice problems after a given reading. Keep track of the questions or concepts that you struggle with so that you can go back to them at a later date. Another thing you can do is to create milestones throughout your studying. For example, let's say you want to get through 3 readings in a given week. If you get done with those readings and have 1 day left, you can use that last day to go over some of your weaker areas. But let's say you finish all the readings on the last day of the week and you have no time to go over any weaker areas. The important thing here is to make note of those areas and move on to the next step of readings. You don't want to spend too much time on a reading or a concept and not give yourself enough attention for other areas of the curriculum. And over the course of studying, this can end up putting you behind. This is why having frequent milestones throughout your study plan can be beneficial, because if you complete a milestone early, that'll give you time to come back to these areas that you could spend more time on. It can also give you less work to have to do at the end of your study plan. So focus on results, not time in the books. What we mean by this is your time reading through the CFA curriculum or a prep provider's materials should be measured not in terms of hours spent, but rather how well you interpret the information and how well you retain the information. When it comes to how well you interpret the information, a good example of how this works is, let's say you're registered for the exam with someone you know, and throughout your studying you have discussions with each other about the readings, your understanding of the material, and doing so without having the books right in front of you. Another way to go about this is, could you explain the concepts or parts of the reading to someone who's not even in finance, the way they can understand it? When it comes to how well you retain the information, obviously this can be done by how well you do with the practice problems or mock exams. But later we're going to talk about how you should think about doing these. Find gaps during your workday. This is really going to depend on what type of work schedule you have. If you have the type of work schedule where you get a couple of breaks and lunch, you can use this time to maybe go over some of the areas you covered the previous day. For example, this is a good time to touch up on those areas that you may need to give a little more focus on. A good way to do this is to plan it the day prior. That way when you're at work, you know exactly what you need to focus on. Creating some flashcards based on the readings or practice questions can be a really efficient way of doing this. The evening prior, you can spend a few minutes jotting down some of the areas that you want to go over, preferably in some of the areas that you found to be a little more difficult. Now, if you don't have any time while at work, perhaps you have time during a commute. If you drive to work, you may be limited to just audio. The curriculum does have an audio version, however, candidates might prefer to use an audio from a prep provider if feasible. But if you take public transport, you may have more study options, such as using flashcards as mentioned earlier. We would recommend that you use any time available during your workday to go over materials that you covered during the previous day or week. And the reason for this is because it's much easier to go over materials that you already covered rather than go over new materials when you're in an environment that maybe have distractions. And that brings us to our next topic, which is how to minimize distraction. As we mentioned earlier, distractions are most likely going to occur, and by distractions we mean things that are within our control, such as thinking about things while you're studying. And what this may do is cause you to spend a little more time than you intended to on a particular reading or concept. So there are ways you can help train yourself to minimize these distractions and make your study time more efficient. One way to do this is to set a strict time limit for when you're studying. For example, let's say you schedule 2 hours in the evening for studying from 6 to 8 p.m. From 6 to 7:30 p.m. you designate for reading, and 7:30 to 8 for doing end of the chapter practice problems. Now the important thing here is that at 7:30 you stop reading no matter what, and immediately move on to doing practice problems. Even if you weren't completely focused for the first hour and a half, or if you didn't quite finish the readings, force yourself to stop and make note of those areas you didn't quite finish or understand completely for a later day, and then do practice problems for the remaining half an hour. And this is just one example. What you specifically do within that time frame is up to you. What's important is that you set strict time limits for yourself. Anything you don't get through or understand completely, you make a note of those. And the idea here is not to accumulate all these sections or other readings or concepts for a later date, although that's still important, but rather it'll train your brain to hopefully become more efficient with your allotted time frame. So the last topic we're going to cover is how you can properly practice. And this refers to doing practice problems and mock exams. Some common questions candidates might ask are, how many practice problems should I be doing? Or what should I be scoring on the mock exams? So let's look at the first question. How many practice problems should I be doing? Is a question that is asking about quantity. What it's not asking is the quality of those problems, your review of those problem solutions, and your understanding of the question or concept, which are probably better questions to be asking yourself. For example, let's say you finish a more difficult reading and you attempt the end of the chapter practice problems. So not fully understanding a practice problem can be similar to skipping over reading, because it'll most likely be asked in a different one in the exam. So simply memorizing the practice problem and moving on to the next rather than understanding the underlying concept may not be the best method. A better method is to keep that strict time limit as mentioned in the previous slide and make a note of that practice problem for a later date so you can spend a little more time understanding it better. Now we want to address that second question, what should I be scoring on the mock exams? Rather than focusing on what score you should be getting on the mock exams, we think it's best to focus more on the review of the practice problem and its solution. And the reason for this is because you don't know how well that score will translate to the actual exam. In addition to that, you don't want your scores on your mock exams to affect how you think you'll do in the actual exam. Because it's still possible for a candidate who fails every mock exam they take to still pass the real exam, and vice versa. So that's why it's better to focus more on the review of the practice problems and their solutions and your understanding of the concepts rather than what score you should be getting on the mock exams. Hope you got some value from this video. If you did, please give it a like. Also, if you have an efficient way of studying for this exam that wasn't mentioned in this video that you think would be helpful to others, please leave that in the comment section below. Or if you have any questions related to this video, please feel free to ask those below as well. Thanks for watching.